Thank you, everybody, for joining us. This is the last of our panel discussions related to the art and art therapy of papermaking, which has just been released a couple months ago. So we're really excited to have everybody join us. We're hoping that these videos, this is number 4, are useful for folks not only to learn about the book itself and learn a little bit about the presenters and their work, but also a way to kind of inspire a new generation of paper makers that want to kind of integrate papermaking into their socially engaged art practice, their activism, and or their art therapy practice. So we're super thrilled to have everybody. And
yes, and the QR code that you see in the corner of this slide is to a accessible Google folder that includes all of the recordings and slide presentation as well as references for not only this panel, it'll be up this week, but also all of the panels that have been in this series September through December. So you can feel free to access as well as share with anybody who is interested in learning more.
We currently have with us Amy Koski Richard, and she's joining us from Florida, which is must be nice and warm and cozy down there. And Amy Richard received her MFA in book arts from the University of Iowa Center for the Book and BFA in studio art from Lamar University, United States. Amy is a visual artist and writer. Her papermaking practice serves as a conduit to the natural environment, as well as spiritual and healing connections to be shared with others. Amy co-authored Chapter 4 in the Art and Art Therapy of Papermaking, entitled Adaptations and Modifications for Therapeutic Hand Papermaking, collaborating with art therapists Amy Bucciarelli and Genevieve S. Camp. Amy wrote about her work and experiences with hand papermaking in a school-based setting with learning disabled students. So thank you, Amy. I'm really excited to hear your stories, because you've collaborated with Amy and Genevieve on a couple different projects. And so I'm sure you've got a lot to talk about, as well as what you've done on your own. So pretty cool, pretty great to have you join us.
Thank you so much for being here. Yes.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
So I think that, the point of this kind of this panel is for us to kind of explore different settings and environments that our presenters or ourselves have used papermaking in, and I think one of the things that we're kind of interested in is in looking at how people adapt to the settings, and how has that maybe changed some of the engagement level or the purpose or the point or the outcome. So there's a lot here. We could spend hours talking about it, I'm sure. And so I guess to that point, or to that end, we'd love to have Amy, if you wanted to discuss something, share some thoughts about maybe the settings or the programs and populations you have engaged papermaking with.
Sure, I'd love to. Thanks so much for having me, and thanks so much for everyone who's joining us today. I was telling Drew and Gretchen before we started, that it's kind of thinking of what we wrote in our conclusion in our chapter about how this kind of a pebble in the water, and how it sends out all these ripples that just keep going. And I was thinking of seeing John Rousseau here, and then Drew and Gretchen, and these connections that have brought us all together in different ways. It's just been really wonderful. I first learned about the Combat Paper Project at a Dart Hunter meeting, and then read about it in magazine and so forth, and then met Drew Matott through a series of events, begged them to come to Gainesville. And there was something about it that just captured my imagination. It captured my heart, and I thought, man, this is major work. And I was deep into papermaking at the time, and then I met John Rousseau at a papermaking conference, and was blown away by the work he was done. And just to make a long story short, it led to a series of papermaking workshops that I got involved in and helped host and facilitate, and then met some art therapists, Amy Bucciarelli and Genevieve Camp, my kind of cohorts, and writing that chapter. And that took me to some uncharted territory where we worked with individuals from an eating disorder clinic, doing paper making and processing paper from clothing that these people had outgrown because they were gaining weight and getting healthy again, which was wonderful. It was really transformative for all of us. And then working with Amy to help strategize, so because she really wanted to take paper making to the bedside in the hospital, and working, and she wrote a beautiful, touching chapter on that. And then the whole thing actually inspired me to quit my job, my day job, and go and work on a master's degree at the University of Iowa and study papermaking and just really, really immerse myself. And when I came back, I was approached by a group called Arts for All Florida, and they were seeking artists that do residencies in the schools with disabled students, and then also with young people in the juvenile justice system. And so I just think it was the work, seeing Drew and his cohorts at work with Piece Paper Project and all these different things that gave me the encouragement and gave me the wherewithal to think that I could actually pull this off, because it was kind of daunting, but I really wanted to see. I mean, they wanted an artist residency. They didn't particularly care about the paper making, but I was determined to bring this in the classroom and work with students with disabilities and see what happened. And I just remember seeing Drew at the Piece Paper Project early on and thinking, gosh, that's so amazing, but oh man, I could just never do that. it's just too much. Oh my God, how do they do that? But I kept kind of taking notes and noticing how they modularized everything and packed things into rolling suitcases and this and that. And so lo and behold, after working with it for a while, just thinking it through, I ended up devising my portable papermaking studio that I got everything on this one cart. It was like a dolly that folds down into a four-wheel cart, and I could barely fit it all in the back of my little Toyota Matrix, but it fit. I got it all in there. And I would just load that sucker up in the parking lot of the school parking lot. And they also wanted me to do 2 schools in one day each time. That was like a requirement. So
a lot.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh man.
I go to one school, unload everything, do all this stuff, pack it up again, and then drive like 20 minutes to the next school in the county and do it again. Ooh. And
oh wow.
Which really forced me to be organized. But it worked. And then it was funny. Like I'd have people approach me because they thought I was the cleaning lady when I was pulling my little cart through the school. They'd ask me if they could have a bucket or something, But it was just amazing. And working with kids as young as kindergarten through 9th grade, and I just wanted to see, how does this work? What can I do? What can I contribute, or what, how would this work in a classroom setting? And it works beautifully. And the hardest part, as I mentioned, was saying goodbye to these kids after I did a residency for like 6 weeks at a time.
Oh, wow.
To where they got to where, they'd anticipate me coming, and what are we doing this week? And what are we doing? That kind of thing. And well, we did watermarks. We did what we call like old fashioned paper, where I was mixing hemp and cotton and making this beautiful kind of marble paper. We made sky paper, cloud paper, different things like that.
Yeah, and you did a really wonderful job in the book, Amy, writing up those descriptions, lesson kind of by lesson, and this really compact, comprehensive overview, like chart. And with the attentions and the objectives and all of that of what you were doing. Such a great resource to have.
Well, I hope it is. And that was, of course, that was the Arts for All has this wonderful, infrastructure that provided the kind of guidelines to follow, which is what enabled me to organize all that. And then one of the other daunting things was I had to align all all my activities, they had to align with learning standards. The Florida, I think they're called CPOMs is the acronym, but I can't. But so so that was a learning experience for me, and it also really opened my eyes, like how much this process speaks to science, how much it speaks to history, to language arts, to all these different parts of our education, who we are. And we really had a lot of fun. We made cloud paper, and we talked about the weather and brought a science lesson into it. The old-fashioned paper, we did lessons on the history of papermaking, and brought different aspects into it. We did seed paper and brought science and plants, growing plants into that. So it's really been a lot of fun. And the other part that was, so that was kind of this one avenue. And then working with kids, I didn't write about it in the chapter because there wasn't enough room or whatever. I wanted to stay focused on that one thing, but also had the opportunity, been working with students in the juvenile detention residential programs, and that was really hard, but had a lot of personal growth myself through that, and I would like to do that again as well. That really, and that helped me realize, just an eye-opening experience, how much young people that are in the juvenile justice system, how much it was very clear every single one of these young people was dealing with trauma. Like they were, whatever trouble they were in, whatever trouble they've caused, they also clearly are dealing with trauma in their lives and struggling with it in a big way. And it was just a real wake-up call for me to see what people are dealing with. So.
Yeah, I wonder if you'd be willing to kind of walk us through like your setup. So kind of maybe from how did you generate your pulp for these maybe two different programs? Did you use a blender, or did you, source the material from the school, or maybe walk us through some of the steps of the process, if you don't mind.
Sure. Yeah. So I prepared the fiber ahead of time in my studio. I've got a Oracle, Lee McDonald beater. So I would have that all ready to go. I would kind of consolidate the pulp and get it into those different buckets or whatever, and cart that around. So I'd source that, and I did it a little bit differently because of the time frame. It was really, I had like 90 minutes and sometimes less, which wow. Resulted in me using decal boxes. I ended up opting for a decal box instead of trying to have the vat full of water that I then have to wait and empty and deal with all that. So using a decal box made it so much easier. So I'd have these little vats that were, they're actually trays that are used for bussing dishes in restaurants. So this really small, compact little vats. And then I could just use a small amount of water in each vat and use the decal box. And it turns out the decal box from working with Amy and Genevieve helped me realize that just kind of unwittingly, the decal box ended up being a really powerful tool for students with learning disabilities, because it was less intimidating for them to use. And there's all sorts of like art therapy kind of benefits from doing things this way. And then the other adaptation is having to work in a classroom. A lot of times the workshops, whenever I can, I do it outside because water management is so much easier. But in a classroom and in museums and other places that I've been, water, it was a big concern. They didn't want a bunch of water on the floor. So again, the restaurant industry, I found these shallow trays that are about 18 by 22 inches or something like that. And they're about 3 inches deep. And so I kind of came up with this couching system where I get that grid there. You can see the window grid with and then high density foam insulation. So I'd use those as my couching board. So they're super lightweight. Nobody can get hurt if they bop somebody on the head with it or anything. And so that was my my method for couching sheets onto that. And then as students made more and more paper and the tray filled up, you could just pick up the tray, pour off the excess water in a bucket and keep going, put it back down and get back to work. So things like that made it really easy to logistically to set up shop and then take down real quick. And then for pressing, I didn't press there in the classroom, which was a bit of a downer. It would have been nice to do some human presses and stuff like that. But I just stacked it up in a deep vat, just layered all the different couching trays, brought them home, pressed them and dried them, and then brought the students their papers back the next week when I was back. A couple times I did some other things where I used made molds and decals out of needlepoint circles and with some crinoline fabric on that, and use that kind of like a Nepalese papermaking technique, the pouring technique. And that was really fun because then I left those with the students and they could watch their paper dry. Cool. So you walk in the classroom, there's all these beautiful circles, just wild, beautiful, expressive colors. And it was really nice. So that was
I think that what you just described, Amy, answered the question that Hillary put in the chat about particularly hearing about the CART organization, like how you're forming and couching and drying quickly to get from place to place. So I feel like some of that is definitely what you were describing. But was there anything in particular about the organization of those materials? I know that there's a lot of planning that goes, in advance, to
just figuring out how much how much water does one of those smaller black vats hold, and so how much water do I need? How many buckets do I need where I could just I could just get a 5-gallon bucket filled up and that's enough to fill 5 vats with 3 inches of water for, those kind of logistical things. It took a while to iron out. And then I'd have this like a bigger, deeper vat that I just kept in the car that collected the felts and freshly made paper, and I'd protect it, between some wooden boards. So I left some stuff in the car that I would then, when I'd be done with my session, I'd come back out to the car, and I definitely had to be real organized about how I repacked everything to go to the next spot and to head home and that kind of thing. But those trays, these shallow trays, that's what I do in my own studio. I don't have drains in the floor or anything like that, and they just work. It works beautifully. So the grid kind of helps keep your couching board above water, or and sometimes I double it, and because I'll get so busy I won't even realize how many. When I'm making a bunch of sheets, you get a lot of water collecting in the bottom of those trays. But so that's great.
Yes, and I think one of the things that, as you were kind of sharing, and just like the limitations of time and the organization and working in like a group setting, that can also be really relevant to art therapy, like 90 minutes or maybe 60 minutes, or, it's all very kind of fast and furious, but how do you kind of make it enjoyable, mindful, organized, kind of structured, but expressive experience at the same time. And I always have been very inspired and admire the way that you and Amy Bucarelli and Genevieve Camp have collaborated with one another to really work together. I think in the chapter it talked a little bit, or there was a mention of the benefits, like you as a paper maker kind of brought to Genevieve and Amy as our therapists, and then there were things as our therapists that they sort of informed you as like a paper maker. And I think that's beautiful, and I feel like Drew and I have like been able to also kind of have that collaboration as well. So
that's very true.
yeah.
And when we the first time we all worked together, we did this workshop at the hospital. It was a piece paper, and we were working with Amy B is what we call her at the hospital, working with patients there that came from the floor of the hospital downstairs, and with their also with family and other healthcare workers and stuff. It was a beautiful, beautiful experience. But I remember just being blown away because I'd been doing papermaking for a number of years, and then Amy B gave this PowerPoint presentation before we all went out and started making paper, and she just intuitively, from the little bit of papermaking she'd done with me, just intuitively made these connections from an art therapy standpoint of what these things meant, and how, what was happening, and how papermaking, provides us, helps us get back into our body and out of our head, and, muscle memory, just all these kind of art therapy concepts that I knew nothing about. And it was just like, she just articulated everything that we'd been experiencing as papermakers. It blew me away.
I remember this.
Yeah, do you remember that?
I do. Yeah.
It was just like, definitely. Oh my gosh, she just explained everything we've been doing, and we didn't even know it.
We're like, oh, that's what that's about.
Exactly.
Yeah. So. And then we went out and made paper with the patients. That was super cool. Yeah, people were pulping, I think, face masks and gowns and things from the hospital.
Yes.
And,
Yeah. It was really powerful. So, and that's, that plays into just in my own studio, I've been so curious about the papermaking process, and what is it that seems like it's so much more powerful. I've been a visual artist, for 40 years. It's like, what is it about this process that keeps bringing me back? And I wanted to know about it, even on a physiological level. Like, is it increasing our oxygen intake? Like, what's going on? So I've been playing around a little bit with that too, and done some fun little tests with friends in the studio where I was measuring people's, heart rate and oxygen levels, and
right.
before and after papermaking. And I'll put that article. It was a hand papermaking article in that folder of resources if anybody's interested. But there's some kind of interesting little preliminary, hints that from the research. I didn't realize that we actually absorb oxygen from water through our skin. Things like that I didn't know about. Cool. And then
cool. Wow.
Yeah. So amazing. Yeah. Thinking about some of the things maybe that you learned, or benefits within the different settings, like lessons learned, or things that you were like, I'm gonna remember to kind of implement that, or maybe on the spot kind of implemented. Anything that kind of comes to mind related to that?
I mean, the first thing was resilience. It just really helped me learn resilience, and being faster on my feet, being more flexible, that kind of thing. Anytime you watch kids make art, it's just inspiring as it can be. Like, seeing them experiment and be playful. And then, but also lessons to me, like, I would be so focused on like showing them about papermaking that I was missing opportunities where just the preparation of wetting a felt, pouring water over a felt and kind of squeegeeing the water out before they start. The kids, I just started noticing these kids they liked getting ready to make paper as much as they did making the paper. So learning things like that, to just being more in the moment myself, paying attention to those little things. And as it turns out, that was part of that ended up meeting one of the learning standards was following directions, being able to implement directions accurately, and that kind of thing. And then I also learned that not everybody loves water and pulp, which there are some students that were averse to it, and so there was other techniques like squeezing pulp out of a bottle, where I made used highly beaten pulp with a lot of methyl cellulose, and they could squirt it out of the bottle and be expressive without having to get their hands wet. So those are things didn't occur to me that an art therapist would think about, but that wasn't on my radar. So learning to be just to be more observant, be more in the moment, look for opportunities for wonderful experiences outside of papermaking as well. I get so focused on it that realize that there's many other ways to connect as well.
Yeah, and everybody is unique, as far as their responses, whether
Yes.
it is the tactile or the texture of things, or the use of water with that we're not always aware of, even as our therapists, that get just in that moment that you're like, well, okay, like having to shift, sort of with that. And those are really great adaptations to kind of add to kind of that toolbox, and also what you had mentioned, which has come up in other panels as well, like the distinguishing the process versus product. That is one thing that has come up time and time again, and how it's not like one or the other, it's both. The process is just as valuable as the end kind of result with that. I know in our therapy there's always this ongoing debate about process versus product, and that and what's more valuable, or the challenges sort of with that. And it's really been really nice to hear everybody speak about sort of that. So thank you for adding your kind of
Yeah, for sure. I think again, it's kind of, as the other panelists have kind of talked about as well, is the just how much we have to adapt the paper making techniques to our settings. Like, it's constantly, so kind of being able to have a thorough knowledge and experience of paper making is really handy, because when you show up somewhere, you have to basically adjust and situate the studio in different environments all the time. And so knowing how to reduce the water, why you need water, right? Why you need all these tools, and what are the important tools on that cart for this situation. And reminds me of once we did a workshop with the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and we had a few participants who were blind. And so we were set up to pull sheets and do pulp printing, which is the standard like piece paper shtick, right? And but for the folks who were blind, we were very lucky that we had about 20 Nepalese style molds, in our kit. And so we pulled those out, and then we mixed up different pulps so that they could pour with it. And it was really amazing to watch, because the blind participants would stick their hand in the inside the mold and feel where the edges were. And then they would ask for a color, and somebody would hand them like a blue scoop of blue pulp, and then they would feel kind of where the pulp was being poured, and they actually were able to do designs and muck about in the water to kind of even out the pulp, and then pick up the mold itself and put it over to be strained, and then even further giving them a sponge and a wet felt to press it. They were able to hand press the material. So that kind of worked really well. And that was the result of basically not knowing that we were going to have blind participants. We just had, we had to adjust our setup, and it worked really well. So
that's fantastic. And you think about it for Papermaker, when we're familiar with how you process the pulp, and how if you knew that you were working with that demographic, you could do all kinds of wonderful things and have pulps of different textures, available to have papermaking experience on a totally different level.
Exactly. My favorite with the Nepalese is when you get everybody to pour a really beautiful sheet, and then after it drains, you teach them how to throw the pulp to make like holes, or to really get expressive, and you have this full body experience of just trashing, like throwing pulp at the mold and kind of making a mess and seeing where it goes from there.
But for some reason that made me think of another adaptation we were talking about for the classroom and whatnot. And this just came from doing it for a while, realizing that by preparing pulp and beating a little bit longer than I might normally do for, for a European style paper, found that for the decal box, it worked really beautiful because it slowed the drainage down a little bit. So just little technical kind of tricks like that, where it gave the students the ability to have more time with the pulp, even though the decal box is kind of a quick and easy, sheet of paper. I wanted them to have that experience of doing the Vatman shake, where you kind of play with that pulp in the mold a little bit longer. So kind of overbeating the pulp a little bit really helped with that. So little things like that. But yeah, Drew's totally right. Like in my studio, I want everything a certain way. And then I got in the classroom and I found myself coming up with all kinds of really quick solutions. And so that, it's a lot of fun. I found like we were talking earlier about like what are some of the things that I learned from it, maybe that I'm adapting in my own studio. And as a result of that teaching and working with groups like this, I use the decal box a lot more than I did before, because it's just a great way to test an idea out, to test colors out, to test the fiber out, that kind of thing. So I find it's really useful just in my own work as well. So things, a lot of the things that I developed for this kind of modular portable studio, I use in my studio all the time now, because it's just so handy and easy.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense because it allows you to practice, right? And so you've got to adapt and then practice, and you're like, hey, actually, this works kind of cool. Let me bring it back to the studio and then use it in a more controlled environment, if you will.
Right.
And the more that I do and adapt to different settings, the more that I'm getting new tools in my studio that are lower grade or lower, like going from the Hollander to a whiz mixer, or then to the blender, and so now kind of the hand blender, and kind of continuing to reduce it. And I enjoy that, that element to it. So that's pretty cool. So thank you.
I think become more experimental, kind of, I guess I could say.
Yeah, and it makes it more accessible for people to do paper making on their own with ordinary kind of equipment as well. Yeah, I know my experience going into a setting that is not conducive for paper making, whether it's a office, carpeted sort of space that I do my therapy or did my therapy work in at that time, or in I used to work in a domestic violence shelter, and using the shelter kind of art room space, and bringing blenders in and being able to press the paper, put it up on the windows to dry. There was a lot of thinking and planning sort of ahead of time that I had to really be thoughtful about. I feel like our therapists are always prepping and thinking about that, but I feel like it was definitely much more thought that went into that. And then like Amy had mentioned, things happen sort of in the moment, that you just figure out sort of with that. So I had a kit that fit like in a big plastic like container, where the blender would go, the molds and the decals, which were made out of painting stretcher bars, and we had felt, just regular kind of craft felt for the interfacing. All of that like went into sort of that kit, and then I could just kind of carry it into the shelter and then take it out, and that made it possible. And and then in the office setting, I didn't have any access to water, like right at where I was at. I had to like go down the hall into the bathroom for that. So really, making sure that I had sort of water that could be used for the vat or the paper making, just things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Since then, I've learned, like you mentioned the interfacing or felt or whatever, using kind of old wool blankets, but also that non-woven interfacing. But I've recently, started somewhere I saw somebody using just muslin, which was a lot cheaper a yard than the interfacing. And I've been using that in my paper making too as well. Now it's a lot more, kind of accessible or less expensive, that kind of thing. Different adaptations like that. Playing around with for pressing paper in a portable environment like that. I've used those space bags that people use to store their sweaters and stuff in.
Oh, that like kind of suctions like all the air out.
To de-water the paper. Yeah. So I just take the two top and bottom boards, slide it into that bag, seal it up, and put a shop vac on it. And that's a fun thing.
That's really, because you can see all the water. Yeah.
That's great. A little vacuum press.
A little vacuum press. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's nice. That's nice.
So just little adaptations like that come to mind from some of this stuff. Just playing around with it.
Yeah, it's key to be able to think quick on your feet. I think for a lot of stuff, but also I found for me when I travel to do the workshops that less is more. So obviously, if you know your setting, then it's great. You can go in with exactly what you need, not one bucket more, not one scooper more. And I think that it helps, as you mentioned, Amy, earlier, kind of modularize it, or the experience, kind of make it so everybody has the same experience. So if one person has a problem, then you know exactly where you can dial in very quickly what the problem is and get them on their way. But also less is more. It's less moving parts that you have to consider, less cleanup and setup that you have to do, but also less distractions for the students. And
Absolutely.
so, if you put too much out there, they're like, where to go. And
exactly.
And so,
yeah. I think having a small car was actually helpful.
I think so. I agree. The bigger the vehicle, the more stuff you bring in, and then you're like, oh, I didn't use that.
Exactly.
So, yeah, I have a rule just in my studio. If I don't touch it in a year, I toss it. So I'm very I've got getting now to the end of the year, and it's time for me to go through and kind of get rid of some things that I built or used, but haven't used them since. And so I try to keep things pretty tight that way.
Yeah. I may need to adopt that.
No, that's just my way. I like to keep it small and simple.
Yeah. No.
The discussion forum that we have on Facebook, this QR code goes directly to being able to request a private group. So you can make a request to join the group, and this way, the conversation or dialogue, or if people have questions, many of the authors are part of the group as well. Feel free to join in with that. And then just some resources to share: Amy's website, which is a lot of classes and workshops and things that she's doing. I don't know if you've got anything to plug specifically, Amy, currently.
No, just to watch for some more workshops next year. I'm in the process of getting that together. Yeah.
And